Hey guys, welcome back to the show. This week we're going to analyze the Simpsons episode Dancing Homer from season 2. In these tend to be older Simpsons episodes, the jokes are more organic, they flow from the plot and characters, less so in the later seasons. It becomes more like Family Guy. A lot of jokes are shoehorned in. And so there's a lot of truth to these jokes. There's a lot of truth in what they say. So let's analyze the jokes and glean whatever psychological information we can from them. And I think there's just a lot of psychological truth in jokes in general, because that's part of the reason why we laugh, is the relief of this joke pointing out this truth, and does so in a clever way, and so we laugh. There's a great relief in that. So we start off this episode. Well, first let me just say, this episode, Dancin' Homer, Homer becomes the mascot for the local baseball team. As Homer refers to it, the Bush League team, the Isotopes in Springfield, and later goes on to become a mascot for Capital City for the Major League team. Doesn't work out as well. We'll discuss exactly why that is. Why it could not have worked out well for Homer based on how he was relating with people, specifically Mr. Burns prior. So yeah, the theme is validation versus connection here. And also I think the theme is status and the inevitable price of status. And is Homer first willing to pay the price for status, or is he even able to pay the price? We will see. This episode begins Homer sitting in the bar feeling sorry for himself. The barflies, including Barney, are interested and want to hear what Homer has to say. Hear what Homer has to say while he's at the bar feeling sorry for himself. And Homer says, I don't include too many quotations here, but this one's good. He says, look, there's only one thing worse than being a loser, and it's being one of those guys who sits in a bar and tells the story of how he became a loser. Homer doesn't want to do that. So this is after the fact. After he went to Capital City and didn't work out. And Moe says, oh, come on, Homer. And immediately, Homer relents, which is a great joke. And it really speaks to how a lot of us, especially if we haven't been to therapy, our psychological baggage is right there in the service, and we need to talk about it. We absolutely have to talk about it, no matter how much we say we don't want to talk about it. But it's the phenomenon of being, having a difficult time holding space for anybody else to talk in a conversation. So if somebody says something like, oh yeah, I went to this water park this past weekend, what a lot of people's responses, or if you need to go to therapy, though you don't know it, your response will be, oh yeah, I went to a water park too this other time and it was fun. You immediately talk about yourself. Just any opportunity to talk about yourself, even if you're totally overtaking the conversation in a uncharismatic way, in a very boring way, in a way that pushes people away, even though you don't know it, and nobody will ever tell you. And this is what Homer does here. These issues are right below the surface. All it takes is a little bit of a prod. Homer doesn't want to be the last thing in the world he wants is to talk about how he's a loser, a little bit of a prick, a little bit of a prod from Moe, and he's ready to talk about it for the next 20 minutes. So Homer begins the story of what happened, and it begins nuclear power plant employee, spouse, and no more than 3 children night, indicating the disconnection that Homer feels with what he perceives to be status in his life. The power plant is represented by Mr. Burns, and to a lesser extent Smithers in this episode. Homer's not appreciated. He is not seen. Even when there is an employee night, he can't bring any more than 3 children. So hey, Homer, you better not have a 4th children if you wanted one, because that child will not be seen by that which represents authority in your life. Homer is, you could say, is repressed. And they take a bus to the stadium. Why would they take a bus to the stadium? There's clearly plenty of parking. It's all contrived. Homer, when he does get a night out on the company, it's all contrived. He can't do it on his own. He needs to take the bus. And even when they get to the stadium, of course, Otto's the bus driver, even when they get to the stadium, it's by accident. I mean, here presumably they were in a chase with police officers, and they only made it to the ballpark on accident. Otto says, yeah, we think we lost him. And hey, we're at the ballpark, right? 2 birds, 1 stone. That's what he goes on to say. So, we're just setting up Homer's dilemma and why he becomes Dancing Homer and why that Dancing Homer that works so well in Springfield doesn't work well in Capital City. It's a lot of setup here, and it's really good. It just seems like these random jokes, these Family Guy jokes, but it's really not. Lisa appreciates going to the ballpark. She says something very interesting here that doesn't seem, it just seems like Lisa being intellectual, but later on, you realize that the profundity here. And she says, there's just the green grass of the outfield, the crushed brick of the infield, and notably, the white chalk lines that divide the man from the little boy. Lisa appreciates sports, specifically baseball, because it's like this contest on this playing field with these guidelines, literally guidelines, lines drawn in the dirt, in the crushed brick, that delineates little boys from men. That's her appreciation of the sport. But, she does not have Homer's level of repression that goes into him, performing at his job, even if he doesn't do such a great job at it. For Homer, it's more about, well, he says here the beer, but what does the beer represent? It's this tool that Homer uses to express himself, because he feels like he needs to contort himself and be a certain way in order to show up at this job 40 hours a week. And now this is his chance, and he barely gets a chance, right? He can't bring any more than 3 children. They barely make it there. He has to take a bus. I mean, how annoying is that? I mean, nothing's worse than having a parking lot somewhere and then taking a bus somewhere else, right? It's like, it's just the worst of both worlds. Mm-hmm. Right. So Lisa likes delineation. Homer likes expression. And then he even says to Marge, this ticket doesn't only give me a seat, it gives me the right, nay, the duty, to make an ass of myself. Homer is here to compensate for all the repression that is part of his life, most of the year. Right. Then more indication of the repression, not a healthy relationship with authority is, so the game will show up first. Mr. Burns likes them. Of course, everybody's smiling, even though, I don't know, this Gamble boy looks like he's missing a chromosome. But anyways, the Gambles, of course, to contrast the Simpsons. And yeah, I guess I don't show it here, but Smithers puts a smiley face next to their name. Then the Simpsons show up. Smithers whispers, "It's the Simpsons." Of course, Burns, perhaps because he doesn't really hear Smithers, or perhaps because it's a Freudian slip, he calls them the Simpsons the Simps, which is, of course, a joke packed with meaning. I don't need to insult your intelligence by analyzing that too much. But again, it's just about Homer being unseen. And he doesn't really want to be around Burns anyways, because Burns, the card's old with all the information of the Simpsons, the card's old, so he refers to Maggie as expecting. Obviously, when they made the card, Marge was still pregnant. And Homer doesn't want to spend any more time around the boss. The baby's name isn't important. Let's go, Marge, right? I mean, just like, it's very much like an adolescent on a field trip with their teacher. It's like, well, if you don't have to be around the teacher, then don't be around them. Let's just try to avoid them as much as possible. Let's just go and sit in the stands by ourselves. And I want to include this in here because, before the game gets started, one of the players for the Springfield Isotopes, Flash Gordon, I think? Or is that something else? I forget the guy's. His nickname's Flash. He invites Marge back to his hotel room in the Cozy Court Motel with 2 Ks. I mean, that's a great joke in its own right. I mean, it just speaks to the seediness of this hotel. It's that you could just, both of those words start with C. Why would you change them both to K? You only change them both to K if one of them's C and the other one's K, just to make it the same first letter. It's so seedy, it doesn't even make sense. Marge gets invited to Flash's hotel room, but there's a security here with Homer. He doesn't care. In fact, he's kind of impressed. Like, yeah, Marge, you're so romantic. the magic, he's not concerned that Marge is going to cheat on him with this baseball player. Yeah, I mean, he's washed up, but, he did spend some time in the majors, and there was Bart at least wanted his autograph. Bart doesn't want Homer's autograph, so that implies some kind of status, but Homer's okay with this. Like, in a way, he's secure in his place in the community. Because the community, we could say, accepts him for who he is. Marge and Homer have a connection. Marge sees all of Homer's faults, and she still loves him. I think this gives Homer this deep sense of security that he doesn't bring to his relationship with Mr. Burns, and this leads to his downfall. Well, his success at first, but then his downfall. And again, just speaking to Homer's being part of the community, is he's on the Jumbo-Vision and he likes it, but even when it's shown that his fly's down on the Jumbo-Vision, he's totally okay with it. He's totally why is it? He's totally okay with it. He's just like, yeah, thanks for letting me know, everybody, that my fly was down. You can see Lisa's embarrassed. Bart doesn't care. He's seen by Springfield. Right, Homer is seen by Springfield, and Lisa will bring this up later. And he's okay with it. Then Mr. Burns comes out on the field to throw the first pitch, and he gives some line to Smithers here of when he was a young man, he had a patented pitch that was compared to many to the trouble ball of Satchel Paige. Of course, the thing about Satchel Paige's trouble ball is it was just a fastball. It was like marketing. And it was just BS marketing. It was just a fastball. But it was a really good fastball. Burns is trying to do the same thing, indicating that Burns' status here isn't real. He's just BSing. So then he throws the first pitch, and of course, it barely makes it off the mound, and everybody laughs at him. Sorry, Burns has status here, but in the context of Springfield, everybody's on the same playing field. And I think it's not. I think it's symbolic that they go to a playing field to see how everybody's on the same, level playing field. That's the usage. So there's a comfort here. Right, there's a comfort here. Everybody knows Homer. They know his faults, especially Marge, and Homer's totally comfortable with it. Yeah, Mr. Burns maybe has some status over him. He's not that comfortable, but at least he's free to laugh at his boss. And Burns knows it, right? And Burns knows that, it's very much like in the other season 2 episode, which I'll get to at some point, A Brush with Greatness, when Marge paints Mr. Burns, and he looks old and frail, and people like it. I think it's Lisa's teacher, Miss Hoover, says, yeah, Mr. Burns is rich and evil, but he's also old. He's frail. So it offers that perspective on his richness and supposed evilness. So they all get to laugh at Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns knows it. Then we have another... Then we have another. Well, I think this indicates the theme in this, and what Bleeding Gums Murphy does is in his extra long singing of the national anthem, which in the episode, according to the Simpsons, is 26 minutes, but it's still 52 seconds from the viewer's perspective, which is a really long joke. He sings the national anthem for himself. It is all Bleeding Gums Murphy and his self-expression, but only Lisa likes it. And this foreshadows what Homer's going to be, Homer's dilemma here is he invents this mascot that's all about Homer and his self-expression and who he is, and hey, look at me, Homer. And only a certain segment of the population are going to like it. Only Springfield will like it. Just like only Lisa likes Bleeding Gums Murphy's, singing of the national anthem, which I think, 15 to 2 seconds is extremely long for a joke. Probably even back in 1992 or 91, whenever this episode came out. But I think it's just, as a side point, I think it's very American that they could get away with a joke that's 52 seconds because it's about the national anthem. So Americans, we'll sit through it. Because we like the national anthem. I mean, that's why it was such a big deal. If you're not from America, that's why it was such a big deal with those football players were taking a knee. I think football players still are taking a knee, but I think people just realize, yeah, it's probably not that big of a deal. Just any excuse for an argument about our culture war that's going on right now. But yeah, here we have a microcosm, I think, of what will happen to Homer later on this episode. And Burns comes and sits in the bleachers with all the other employees, and it's just more indicative of the overall cheapness of this night. Right? Nuclear plant employees, spouses, and no more than 3 children. Also, we're going to go to this baseball game that nobody really wants to go to, as indicated by nobody's in the bleachers over here, on from our perspective, the right side. And I don't have it included here, but the announcer is talking about the Isotopes have a 26-game losing streak, which is some kind of record, and the announcer says, hey, look at that, our sleepy town is in the record books, again indicating Homer's status. This indicates Homer's status because he is accepted by this sleepy town. He can only be accepted by this sleepy town that that has a baseball team, a Bush League baseball team that's has a 26-game losing streak, which is some kind of record. So Burns doesn't really want to lower himself, but he does it to prove that he's the friend of the employee, and he sits the employees, and he just happens to sit next to Homer. And of course, Homer, when Mr. Burns comes and sits next to him, Homer is in full self-expression, unbridled, unarticulated self-expression, very much being a child, making faces at the players and chanting taunts at them, taunting the players in a sense. We want a pitcher, not a belly itcher, whatever those were. And he's really upset that Mr. Burns comes and sits next to him and says, the best night of the year. I mean, this is the best night of the year for Homer. I mean, how sad is that? Of course he wants to get drunk because he doesn't see any kind of expression any other way. I mean, if this is the best night of the year, that's pretty sad. But he thinks it's ruined because he cannot get drunk. They're both a little bit nervous around each other. Obviously, Homer's going to be more nervous around Mr. Burns. He pretends like he doesn't want to drink beer. Realizes that Mr. Burns wants beer. Although, of course, Mr. Burns' character isn't really fleshed out at this point because there's no way Mr. Burns in later episodes would want a beer. But in season 2, he does. And Homer only wants the beer now because he sees that maybe it's okay because Mr. Burns wants a beer. And he even says to Mr. Burns, well, if somebody of your stature wants a beer, then it must not be that bad. And Mr. Burns joins in the taunts. They do a wave together. They seem to be getting along. But really this is Homer seeking Mr. Burns' validation. And this will be shown later on. Homer's only acting this way because Mr. Burns is okay with it. If Mr. Burns wasn't okay with this, if he wasn't drinking a beer and doing the taunts, Homer would stop drinking the beer and the taunts and doing the taunts too. So again, this is an indication that this is Homer seeking validation, not a real connection. He is taking Mr. Burns' lead. And it works out here for short term because they just happen coincidentally to share the same values and strive for the same experience, at least in this context. But his failure to connect well here will sow the seeds of his destruction later on. And then I got to include this still in because this is my buddy Derek's, favorite moment, I think. Where Mr. Burns and Homer's arms are around each other. We're not going to see much of this in later episodes. And then why is Mr. Burns upset here? Oh yeah, he says, my one game a year. So this is the one game that Mr. Burns goes to in a year, and it's ruined by pathetic incompetence because the Isotopes are going to lose now their 27th game in a row. So now, this is why Homer becomes Dancing Homer. It's not because he wants to get into the game. It's not because he cares about having fun in his own right. It's only to protect his boss from any kind of negative feeling. Which, of course, indicates the validation issue. And to carry over from the intoxication prior to the beer and how Homer deserves to make an ass out of himself and get drunk because this is his one night of the year to do it. He got up in front and felt an intoxication that had nothing to do with alcohol. This is Homer's voiceover from the bar. It was the intoxication of being a public spectacle. This is a different kind of intoxication. Everybody's embarrassed, but the slugger, the washed-up slugger McCloskey, hits a home run. But Mr. Burns isn't happy. He says Homer Simpson's shameless display of exhibitionism tainted the entire evening. So now Homer's back. Not that it was a real connection before, but now Mr. Burns is able to see the false connection. It was just Homer seeking validation. Right? And trying to get Curry even more favor from Mr. Burns ended up ruining whatever pretense of connection was there, which is ultimately what ends up happening in these kinds of situations where you have a fake connection and it feels good and it can be intoxicating. You know, the intoxication that Homer felt here, it was the same, you know, when he's dancing in front of people, it's the same intoxication that he felt here when him and Mr. Burns are supposedly friends. So, to continue, everybody's embarrassed. Homer's banned for life again, indicating that this was ultimately about Homer's performance in front of Mr. Burns, not a real connection. He was just going for Mr. Burns' approval. The owner of the Isotopes comes out and offers Homer to be a mascot for the Isotopes. And, you know. What do I say here? Yeah, it's just, anyway. So here's the real point. Yeah, I don't know why I included that. You know, hey, not all these stills are total winners. So we go to the next scene. Now we're in Act 2 where Homer is dressed up in his outfit. I think a lot is indicated in this outfit. Homer chose this outfit. Homer chose the ridiculous cape, the suspenders. This is Homer's self-indulgence. Right, this is Homer's self-indulgence. This is all about Homer. And, you know, Homer becoming the mascot has indicated that this isn't really genuinely healthy, is that, you know, it introduces some baseness, I guess you could say, into the Simpsons family. Because he says, hey, don't fill up on those vegetables. Save room for nachos, right? Save room for junk food at the ballpark. We're going to spend a lot of time at the ballpark. This is Homer's self-indulgence, but it's going to work. It's going to work because this is this is Springfield, and Springfield accepts Homer no matter what, which is of course will be part of Homer's downfall later on. I guess Springfield here represents like a family, an insular family that Homer cannot break out of. He's been groomed to be a part of this family, Springfield, and when his antics work when he's in the family, this family can accept him, but when he tries to branch out, it's not going to work. And there's probably some indication here, you know, a lot of the mascots for these Bush League teams that the Isotopes play, like the Burlington Drifters, not exactly the most flattering mascots. Later we have the Salem Boulevardiers, which is a drink. So your mascot's a drink. Homer does a great job, you know, getting the crowd excited, but when he tries to taunt the players, it doesn't work because they're on the field. Right, their life is about the delineation, those lines in the crushed brick that delineate a little boy from a man. It doesn't work on them, but it does work on the fans because they're there for expression. Why does it click twice? It's really annoying. Yeah, I don't know. So this is just an indication that Homer is becoming more popular now. He's, you know, his name's above the actual game. He becomes more important than the game. Homer goes to Helen. the organist, makes some request indicating that he's becoming more a part of the team. But, we look at Helen and what's really going on with Homer, and maybe professional sports in general. The Simpsons creators could be saying, I wouldn't be surprised if they're saying this because they are liberal boomers, but this is a fantasy, right? Helen, she's smoking cigarettes, she has a martini there, she has those posters of hunky men in the background. This is all fantasy. It's not real. Homer's acceptance by Springfield, it's true in a sense, but it's not truly real. It's not real status. Then he does such a good job, supposedly, that he gets called up. So the guy on the left here in the cowboy hat, indicating the sticks podunky kind of nature of Springfield. He says, okay, you get called up to Capital City to be a mascot for their baseball team. Homer's unsure of it. And Lisa dissuades Homer from moving to Capital City, moving the whole family to Capital City, because she says everyone in Springfield knows us and has forgiven us. Let's just take that. It's good enough. Like, Homer, your fly can be down on the Jumbotron and you're totally okay with it. That is a gift. Like, you are groomed to be part of Springfield. You're not going to make it anywhere else. Now, Marge, which is kind of maybe out of character for her, I don't know. I didn't have any thoughts about this. She encourages Homer to go, so they go. And Homer says goodbye to the fans here. This is the most dramatic goodbye, and I think this indicates Homer's eventual downfall, because it's really the fans. It's really Springfield as a city that he's going to miss, because it's Springfield as a city that made him who he is. All right, and continuing. Okay, so now they're in Capital City. Homer's sitting here with the Capital City Goofball, which is the present mascot for the team. This shot just tells everything. I mean, everything about this episode is summed up in this scene. I mean, Capital City Goofball, you don't know who he is. He's totally anonymous. He has a costume on, and right here in this scene, he's talking to Homer about how because of his costume, because of his outfit, because of that thing that covers him up, he can't even urinate properly during the game. He's pointing down to his crotch like, this thing doesn't even have a fly on it. I think and look, Homer, of course, he's just pretty much naked. He's just wearing his skivvies. Especially when we zoom in on Capital City Goofball's face, you have the mask kind of weighing down his head, and the guy's eyes always look a little bit sad. He can't even walk around in the costume because, his head's hitting the lights. The Capital City Goofball, for him to be successful, he needs to, in a sense, repress who he is. He needs to cover up who he is, which is a very liberal, of course, boomer way of looking at, the discrepancy between high status and low status. Like, what are you willing to sacrifice? Is it really a sacrifice, or is it really a price that you pay? Dancing Homer's costume was completely self-indulgent, which again works in a small town, works in an insular community, but it's not going to work in a big city where part of the connection is asking yourself, what do these other people want out there? What do they want to see? And Homer never asks that, which of course leads to his downfall. He's getting nervous here. Then when he gets up and dances, of course, nobody likes his antics. Part of the reason is, of course, the reason why I chose this is because Homer has fear in his eyes, right? His eyes are open. He's a little bit afraid, like a scared animal on the savannah, keeping an eye out for predators, looking for any movement in the bush to see if some lion or, predatory animal is going to jump on him. So maybe it's Homer, he only feels comfortable being himself in Springfield. Maybe it's the big city, Capital City. They don't appreciate his insular nature. Either way, there is a lack of connection here. Now, there's a lack of genuine connection before, because it's just Homer's silly self-expression that people liked him. But here, it's become more stark. And anything that was lacking in Springfield is really made evident here. course, people don't like it. They think that he's making an ass in front of himself, which is what he was doing in Springfield, but Springfield accepts him for that, just like they accept him for, having his fly down. Homer gets fired, after one game. I think it's telling that the owner is Dave Rosenfield, which sounds Jewish, right? I think that I've actually never heard of Rosenfield, but Rosenfeld's a Jewish name. Typically a name, from a group of people, Jewish people who have done a lot to assimilate, and they, change their last names and to assimilate in whatever culture they're in, because to be very cosmopolitan and, to try to fit in a sense, like repressing part of their identity, like Jon Stewart's name. I forget his real last name, but it's something very Jewish and just doesn't look good on the marquee. So he changed it to Stewart for his showbiz career. And that's exactly what Homer didn't do. Exactly what Homer didn't do. He didn't look out at the milieu and ask, what do they want? What do they need? It's all based on what Homer wants. And that's why he's not successful, and that's why he didn't gain the status, and that's why his status in Springfield only works in Springfield. So it's not really about Homer, it's more about Springfield at that point. So I think it's telling that, he has this, what we could assume to be a Jewish owner firing Homer. And Lisa says a lot here in this. She says she doesn't want to go back to Springfield because she'll wither and die like a hothouse flower, which is exactly what happened to Homer. She's not going to wither and die going back to... So the thing about a hothouse flower is it's grown in a certain climate, which makes it really fragile. That's a hothouse flower. That's what this saying represents. You can't take it out of its environment in which it grew up. It's not going to survive anywhere else. This is exactly what happened to Homer. And because of this, he never really cultivated an identity, which is why he could not relate with Mr. Burns, which is why he becomes codependent with Mr. Burns and creates Dancing Homer. It's all the result of Homer being unable to connect with other people. Now, there's some good in that, right? Because he has this relationship with Marge that isn't going anywhere. I mean, it is rock solid. But the bad part is he can't expand. He can't do anything else. That's a huge sacrifice. And maybe the hothouse flower, it grows very well in a certain climate, but it doesn't, he's not willing to change his last name from Rosenfeld to Rosen. He's not willing to do that. He's not willing to ask the questions of what name would work better here. Which that's what, I'm not Jewish, but when my grandfather came to America, one of the things I'm really proud of is he changed our last name. It was a very ethnic, Turkish sounding name, and he changed it to Darien. So he could fit in. And that's one of those things that I have a lot of pride in. I think really what it takes to be an American is being able to do exactly what Homer doesn't do in this episode, which is why he ends up back in his home country of Springfield. And then Bart says, well, I guess it's back to good old Springfield. So the kids are lamenting that they need to go back to Springfield. And as I indicated earlier in the previous Simpsons Psychoanalysis episode, this is Marge's narcissism, right? She scolds the kids for having their own emotions about it. You can't have your own emotions about it because this is hard enough on your father. It's kind of a side point here, but I think worth mentioning Marge's neurosis. And they all say, hey, we're glad to see you. And Homer laments, my kids stood by me. On the way home, I realized how little that helped. This is him talking. Voiceover, talking to the barflies, Barney and Moe included. So now we're back in Moe's tavern at the end of the episode. And Homer realizes, hey, I'm the center of attention through honesty, not through performance. I don't have to perform and get up on the dugout and dance to be the center of attention. I can just be myself. And pretty much what he does is he's the dancing version of Homer, but just sitting down and talking to people. And everybody's really impressed by his story. Like, wow, what is Saga? And Homer loves it. He's like, hey, you guys are hanging on my every word. This is great. And Moe likes it so much, he presumably even gives Moe a free beer and says, tell it again, Homer. And Homer asks the open-ended question to close the episode. I wonder why stories of degradation and humiliation make you so popular. And Moe answers the question off screen. I don't know. They just do. Right? Moe implicitly answers it. Homer asks an open-ended question about the nature of connection, and Homer implicitly answers it. Excuse me. Homer asks the opening question, Moe implicitly answers it, So, I think this episode offers a lot about, like I said before, the theme is connection versus validation. And when you are with somebody and you feel good around them, is it because you're really connected with them, or are you just feeling that intoxication of getting their validation? And are you going to use that intoxication that you feel with them to go out and make an ass of yourself, which ruins, of course, any potential for that relationship? And you may get some success making an ass of yourself, but it's ultimately going to be your downfall. And, really makes this question, what is the price? Because status is nice. Everybody wants status, but there is a price. There is a price. And I think to a certain extent, it's worth it, of course, that the price is more than worth it. But maybe after a certain point, it isn't worth it. And I'll leave you to decide what that is for you. Thank you guys. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you want to reach out and talk to me, let me know what's going on. We do free consultations. joinanimus.com/schedule. And I wish you all the pain and joy that comes from paying whatever price you need to pay for whatever status it is that you want.